Welcome to Talent Strategy 60. I am your friendly neighborhood talent strategy nerd, Dr. Jim, and I am super pumped, as usual, to engage in some phenomenal conversation. And this is actually the flagship episode of our HRTech Innovators and Disruptors series. And in these series, for as long as people are interested in chiming in, we're going to feature really innovative HR tech companies that are shifting the talent strategy landscape. And today's topic is going to be focused on employee engagement and retention, and we're going to have an interesting twist on that topic. So before we dive into the conversation, I want to make sure that everybody gets to know the panelists that are going to be basically dropping some significant knowledge to the audience. I want to make sure they have an opportunity to introduce themselves and share a little bit of their story before we dive in the discussion. So first up, I want to hand off to Prem of Humanly. Prem, welcome to the panel. Why don't you tell the audience and share with the class, quote unquote, a little bit about your story and what Humanly is doing.
Great. Thanks for having me, Dr. Jim. Really happy to be here. Prem Kumar, CEO, co-founder of Humanly.io. We help companies hiring in high volume screen, schedule, and interview candidates more efficiently as well as more equitably. The kind of origin story here is I was getting out of university, entering the job market for the first time. I was going through lots and lots of interviews. Sometimes I didn't hear back from companies, sometimes I did, but I'd compare notes with a colleague of mine. She was someone who I admired a lot. We'd be interviewing with the same companies on the same day for the same job, and we had the same degrees, but they were very inconsistent in how they were interviewing us. They were really grilling me on technical questions, grilling her on technical questions, me not so much. There appeared to be some biases in the process, and it was the first time I really saw that interviewers may base the questions they're asking candidates perhaps on what the candidates might look like, which was a huge bias. As I fast forwarded here, we learned that hiring teams weren't inherently bad. It's just they didn't have the tools and technology to be fair, and that's the problem we're looking to solve.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that one of the core things that Humanly focuses on is removing bias from the hiring process in whatever shape that whatever form that takes. I'm really interested in why you took that focus and how that's relevant, especially when we're looking at it from the perspective of most HR teams. They're struggling for talent. So why is removing bias from the hiring process one of the key things that should be looked at if you're looking at broadening your talent pool? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think starting with, if hiring teams had unlimited time, money, and resources, I feel that every initial candidate interaction would start with a conversation. How do we widen the net? So we provide automation to allow you to do that. But on the bias side, I quite frankly feel that more diverse teams are better teams, and to be able to get better teams and create interviewing environments that are less biased, oftentimes it does take technology to help folks jump in. AI can also add bias to the process. So it's very important to know kind of how the technology is being used, how the algorithms are being trained. But I would also say in this market where it is very candidate driven, you need a process that is inclusive if you're going to convert all types of candidates and get the best quality hire at the end of the day.
Fantastic stuff, Prem. Looking forward to getting your insight into this conversation. I want to next hand it off to Jay. Jay, share with the class or share with the audience a little bit about your story, background, and how TalentWay is impacting the employee landscape.
Thank you, Jim. I am originally like ex-Microsoft employee, so I have a background in technical field, but then I started my own HR tech company in Europe, and I spent almost like 3. And in my own company, when I have like 30 people, I really understood how complicated it is to implement HR process with almost no HR on board or with HR department of one person. So I decided to take a challenge and to try to make it available, this HR function, not only for enterprise, but also for small, medium companies, even where you don't have a mature HR director, for example. And the challenge is how can we achieve this world-class productivity with our people and with our teams? And the answer we have for this is this world-class support for growth and development of those people. If we want them to be world-class performers, we need just to help them to do it. So we're trying to disrupt this field of talent development in the United States. And yeah, this is the way how we do it. We are helping to realize the unique potential talents of each individual, of each manager, help them find their style, their skills to build, and basically then you as a company, you as a manager, you can extract and realize this potential of your teams.
So there's something that's really interesting about your focus on talent development, and I want to have you broaden that out a little bit. Why is the focus on talent development something that organizations and HR leaders and talent strategy leaders should be paying attention to when it comes to just their overall brand in the marketplace and how that impacts their ability to attract the right candidates and, more importantly, keep them?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. For me, I think in most of the cases, the talent development is one of the only options we have to achieve the productivity, engagement, retention we wish. So there are some other cultures like Netflix, for example, where you hire quickly, fire quickly, you always find top performance. You don't invest in junior level people, but in most cases it doesn't work. So I think we just feel that this is the easiest way, to achieve your company goals, and the bottleneck is always in your talents and skills.
Yeah, you're kind of preaching to the choir, Jay, when you talk about the strategy that should be focused on keeping the people that you have, because the amount of money that organizations are burning on constantly just tolerating turnover and not really solving for that, it blows my mind. And I'm going to be really interested in having three founders of tech companies from the CEO mindset, why that mindset needs to be shifted towards keeping the people that you have versus just constantly bringing in more and more people through the front door only to lose them on the back end. So looking forward to your insights, Jay. Thanks for sharing that. Last but certainly not least, I want to bring in CheeTung into the conversation, also known as CT, but I'll probably just call you CheeTung because that's what I'm used to. So tell the audience and a little bit about your story and how EngageRocket is disrupting the marketplace.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me today, Jim. So I'm co-founder of EngageRocket. We help great leaders to build high-performing teams using smart engagement tools. And to date, we've analyzed more than 10 million responses, over 300,000 users. We really focus on the mid-market segment. So we serve companies from between 200 to about 2,000 employees. We've got a few outliers here and there, but from by and large, that's our segment. We serve industries from technology to healthcare to telecommunications, professional services across the gamut. So my co-founder and I actually started EngageRocket now 6 years ago now, and we were formerly directors at a global HR consulting company, and we had spent a lot of time with organizational analytics, trying to figure out how to advise leaders of Fortune 500 companies on managing their teams better, but using data from their organizations. And as I'm an economist by training, and it was always baffling to me that the data that a lot of leaders were using to manage their teams were lagging by 1, sometimes 2 to 3 years. And that was really difficult, because when we are thinking about customer data and the customer journey, we're using real-time data that is fed to us in constant streams. It's like drinking from a fire hose. But somehow, when managing our people, we rely a lot on gut feel, intuition, and survey results from 3 years ago. So that was something that we really wanted to try to change when we started EngageRocket.
So the need for real-time data, and I don't think that can be undersold, because I think all of us are familiar with the pace of change just in the world of work in general. And we've seen the employee landscape change. We've seen the employer landscape change. If you're waiting 3 years for data and analysis coming out of an employee engagement survey, like how valid or reliable or relevant is that data? And those are all important questions. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that engagement piece is fleshed out by some of the insights that you bring to the table, CheeTung. So I'm looking forward to getting your insights. So Before we dive into the discussion, I want to lay out some a little bit of ground rules for those of you who are joining us on the stream. Make sure that you're dropping comments in it. This discussion is designed to be interactive, so if you have comments or responses or questions, make sure you drop them in so that we can have this this three-headed monster of a panel answer those great questions from the perspective of really innovative and disruptive technologies, but also from the lens of executive leadership in HR tech organizations and how that can actually impact your organization. So make sure you do that. So I want to set the stage a little bit. And the approach that I want to, or the landscape that I want to lay out is this. We're all aware how we are in uncertain economic times. There's, depending on who you ask, there's an economic downturn that's happening. We're in a recession, all of that sort of stuff. And typically what you see, and we're actually witnessing some of this in real time, when there is even the rumor of an economic downturn, what you typically see is large organizations or organizations of any size start to scale back on all of the things that are quote unquote fluff. So employee engagement initiatives, wellness initiatives, upskill, reskill initiatives. And in fact, you actually see, you know, we got to tighten up the belts methods or approaches that are happening in the marketplace. You know, you may or may not have heard of a large tech company that's laying off, you know, I don't know, half of their workforce via email saying it's time for you to leave the nest. Facebook and Meta just announced a massive layout where thousands of people have been let go. And the argument that I make here is that if you want to build a sustainable brand as an organization, when there's economic uncertainty, that is your opportunity to really establish yourself and double down on your engagement and retention efforts as an organization versus this just mass layoff approach that seems to be the case in a lot of organizations that we're seeing. So that's what we're trying to solve, and that's the case that we're trying to make on the value of employee engagement and retention focus, especially in uncertain economic times. So before we dive into the discussion, I want to let the panel respond to their perceptions or their feelings on how some organizations are choosing to move forward in uncertain economic times by laying off just arbitrarily vast numbers of their workforce. So I'll lob that over to Jay and get your thoughts on it. How do you respond when you're seeing that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's I talk to founders and executives of tech companies of smaller size all the time, and from what I see, really right now the companies start to think much less about retention and engagement than before, and it for me, of course, it's a wrong strategic decision, because like all these things are so connected, and during the bad times it's actually even harder to engage people and to do like productivity that you want to do more with less. So it's of course each company makes these strategic decisions where it's time to build competence, to buy competence, to fire people, and each situation is individual. But in general, it's not okay what's happening right now in the market.
So I mean, I totally agree with you, Jay, that you know, from a gut feel perspective, that isn't good practice, but I'm kind of putting on the hat of a tech founder. So I'm pretending. Basically, I'm doing cosplay right now. And, you know, as a tech founder, I can look at uncertain economic times and say, look, Jay, I appreciate the sentiment, but I have to keep the lights on and keep the business running. And that might mean making some tough decisions in terms of letting people go or cutting back on things. And I want to pose this to CT, you know, why might that be a misguided position when you're factoring in things like employer brand, employee perception, productivity, those sort of things? Why might I be off base by taking that position?
So I think there's a bit of nuance to this. And I think when we look at just the last 12 to 18 months, tech companies, particularly 12 months ago, money was cheap. And so lots of money were raised, lots of hiring was done on the back of projections that perhaps were quite unrealistic. I mean, in hindsight. And to a certain extent, depending on the degree to which there's this, these projections are off base, there may or may not need to be some kinds of reduction in force, some kind of rationalization of the operating costs that go on. And that does involve these painful decisions that have to be made. However, I think where the nuance comes in is I think just over the past 7-10 days, we've seen two completely different ways of making those moves happen. I think one example, I mean, they're both from both tech companies, one with a very heartfelt, empathetic letter from the founders, explaining why, how, and particularly for those that are, and in any kind of exercise like this, what matters extremely what matters extremely to the company is the people that are staying, that we help relieve them of that survivorship bias, help re-engage them with the mission, and for those that are leaving, making sure that they get a soft landing. And it impacts, to your point about employer brand, it impacts it enormously. When the economy picks up again and you need to start hiring your talent back, you want the people to say, hey, this was a great company to work for. Even though I got let go, I still enjoyed my experience. I learned so much from it. I highly recommend that you go join them. And these are things that people remember for years and sometimes decades.
So I think the employee impact component of what you said, CT, is really important, and I want to transition that to Prem. When you look at making these sort of transitionary decisions, or at least budgetary decisions, or whatever decisions that you need to make, how can you actually execute those things in a people-centric way where you're parting on good terms, and you're creating a scenario where those folks might be welcome back, or at least might want to come back when things improve from an economic conditions perspective? Share with us some of the things that you've seen that have worked really well, where you can make these tough decisions in a people-centric way. You're on mute, Prem.
Thank you, Jim. First off, I think employers have an amazing opportunity right now to solidify employer brand by doing things in the right way. And I'll explain what I believe that to be. And employer brand at the end of the day is brand. I remember when Microsoft did its first set of large layoffs ever. I was working there at the time. I do not remember my exact benefits plan, how much I got paid, but I do remember how they treated me. And I remember how well they treated other people that were exiting. I think memories are being created right now with employers or employees that are leaving, or with the market in general, that really do kind of solidify how you think about employer brands. So expectation setting is critical. I think being very straightforward, not using these kind of vague terms around a reduction of staff, but being very clear. And then even on the onset, when it's a market like it was, particularly in HRTech, with so much VC money coming in, even when you're hiring folks, they should be understanding of, you should be clear about what your long-term plan is and what happens if things don't go the way you intended them to be. Last thing I'll say is there's hard dollars behind this, at least on the candidate side. We see with companies like Virgin Media, they're losing $5 million a year because candidates that have a bad experience are moving and switching to competitors. Same thing on the employer side. If you're not let go in a way that is done fairly and done well, you're going to go out in the world and not be an advocate potentially for that company. I'm lucky to have had a good experience on the Microsoft side.
So, Prem, you bring up something that's really interesting, and that's the impact of how you make an employee feel while they're there during a period of time. And I think that has some great knockdown of impacts, especially when we're looking at solving for the issues of employee engagement or retention. And I think that's a critical jumping off point. So when we're making the case, or when we're making the argument that a lot of companies are going the wrong direction in making sort of some of these draconian decisions as far as their talent strategy is concerned, I want to use that employee feeling component as a springboard or lever to kind of talk about, hey, where is the strategy sometimes misguided in these sort of situations? And I want to hand that off to CT. When you're looking at these sort of situations, uncertain economy, and you're looking at making cuts from an organizational perspective, why is it a bad move, or why is it potentially wrong to scale back in anything that is engagement or retention related strategy from an overall perspective? What are the things that you're setting yourself up for, or failures that you're setting yourself up for by taking that action?
Yeah, I mean, one of maybe the most obvious thing that can come from skimping on some of the diligence here, or some of the investments in making people feel good about their whole situation, however bad it may be, is litigation. And class action is already being discussed in some of these recent cases. Just from a pure economics point of view, that's really just bad ROI. Like, if you're not going to spend that amount of money to make sure that your employees feel good on both sides of the decision. But really, I think there's a moral, almost moral and ethical imperative to this. A lot of these decisions, while it may not be any single person's mistake, because the markets move as the markets move, the leaders of a company still have that responsibility to all their employees to guide them. I mean, their employees have given up a significant portion of their careers, their working lives to contribute to the company. And if leaders are not taking that responsibility to look out for them, that really erodes trust, especially for those who are staying. And the last thing you want after an exercise like this is you've lost a good proportion of your workforce, and the workforce that is staying with you all want to leave. So that you have no business at the end of that.
So I think one of the things that you mentioned that's really interesting, CT, is, hey, you want to hedge against potential litigation. So there's a humane way to kind of move through these decisions where you're kind of insulating yourself against risk. But I want to extend that out a little bit. Let's talk about, when you're looking at your employee engagement strategy and your retention strategy in the context of, hey, there might be an economic downturn, we might have to do layoffs. And I want to ask Prem this question. How do you send that message out in a way where everybody is receiving the message, but isn't freaked out or in complete, or you're mitigating the risk of everybody shifting into like complete survival mode and shutting down? Because these are people's lives and families and livelihoods and all that sort of stuff is at stake. So when you're advising other leaders of organizations, other executives on how do you deliver this message, what's your advice when it comes to that? And especially in light of keeping the people that do remain as engaged as possible, and also paving the way for some of the people that left to come back. How would you approach that problem or that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I'd first set expectations as early as possible, and you can't predict economic downturns, but when you're hiring extremely aggressively, that in a strong market, it might not always stay exactly like that. So even when you're bringing people in, if you're a super high growth company, making them aware of what the risks are and working in this particular environment, even not being able to necessarily predict exactly what might happen. I think when you're actually going through the process, when you are hit and you realize that, hey, we might need to make some changes, it really, is important to get everyone on board. So I've oftentimes seen leadership give a top-down message that even surprises the managers of the employees that are affected by this. I think it's important to make it a conversation, to make sure everyone is on board and can provide that support. It's easier said than done, but it really is a expectation setting at the end of the day. And then showing that to the employees that are staying. I mean, when you're asked to do, more with less. So all of a sudden you're an employee, maybe a lot of your coworkers who you had personal relationships with, but also were working with are no longer here. You're doing more with less. So how's the company going to help you do more with less? What tools are they using to keep you engaged? So I think that it's really important to show with investment in those existing employees, and also to set clear expectations as early as humanly possible.
Yeah, I think your point about setting expectations as early as possible, and even providing a roadmap of, hey, this is where we are. This is what that means in terms of what it could look like within the organization. It's not a restructure. We're probably going to have to look at layoffs. That's just the reality of where we're at. So that's a clear set of statements that you can make across your entire organization, where you're actually being direct with people. And then rather than creating, I don't know, I go back and forth on some of the videos that I've seen where CEOs are making it about them when you've had these huge shifts in the workforce. The optics of that sometimes strikes me the wrong way. And the four of us have actually seen this on LinkedIn, where whenever our communities are hearing words of this, what's typically in our networks is somebody will say, hey, if anybody from XYZ company is laid off, comment here and I'll leverage my network in whatever way that I can to go ahead and help you. I think that's probably a better organizational effort to kind of soften the blow as much as possible. So I think this is an interesting discussion that we've had so far in terms of how do you deliver the message. But let's talk about how you reprioritize engagement, development, retention, even in the face of these sort of things. So the scenario is this: organizations announce some pretty significant shifts. That means a number of people are going to leave the organization. So for those that remain, how should leaders of those organizations focus their messaging from an engagement, retention, and development perspective to maximize the people that are still there and demonstrate a level of commitment to them? And I'm going to hand that question off to Jay. What are some of the things that organizations and leaders within organizations can do to say, hey, this is where we're at, but we're still committed, and we're still committed to the people that are staying on to push forward and be in a better place down the road?
Yeah, Jim. So we as leaders, as executives, what we can do, we can show that we care about people, like we discussed, and we can help them connect again with the company culture, purpose, and vision. So people see the future somewhere ahead, and they understand why they should even maybe work more than before. Because, like Prem said, you will have to do more with less. You have less people, but you need to be even more productive. And so this is the message that we can give from our organization, and we could promise some support for people in the way they feel they need it. So this transparency, but also to be ready for feedback for people. What do you need? Because no one better than you or your manager know what's needed at your team to go to be there where we want to be as a company. So give more tools, more initiative to people. But another key to success is to work with managers, because like we can promise anything from our company, from HR department, but if managers are not like consistent with this, it will never work. So one of our like key priorities could be to consistently work with managers to be sure that they are ready to address each person unique individual needs because if we go deeper into this engagement field, we will see how different people are, how different their demands are. So, and this is the key. And no one HR, it's just not possible to work with each person individually. You just don't have resources for this, but manager can and people can. So this is where we can give some resources and opportunities and support. Jim, I think we don't hear you.
Yeah, I need to unmute myself before I start running my mouth. So Jay, you make some really great points, and I think a couple of things that stood out is I think the way that I heard a lot of what you said is creating a motion where you're transparent and open for feedback, and that's something that I think is really important. And I want to give CT a chance to respond. Is when you're looking at how do you set the tone, how do you demonstrate commitment to the people that remain within your organization, keep them engaged, retain them for the long run. What role do you think transparency and creating that open door feedback plays in advancing your goals of keeping the remaining staff or keeping your staff in general engaged, productive, and retaining them for the long run? Tell us a little bit about, share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I, you know, I can share a little bit, maybe even from personal experience, because we had to go through an exercise like this ourselves. And I'm not saying that what we're doing was right or is the best way to do it, but instinctively as founders, one of the first things that uh, we thought that we needed to do was we had to, in the spirit of transparency, have an open forum. So we called an AMA, and Ask Me Anything session with the founders, and we had we put up a Slido, anonymous questions to come out, and we just took it like every single question that came. We made sure that we responded to it, and we had to be as I mean, there's no BS in this kind of thing, right? You have to be upfront and honest about it. And I mean, I hope it went well. It seems to have gone well so far. I think the other thing was to what Jay was saying, like working and being extremely transparent with managers, and why these need to happen, why are we making the decisions that we're making, for the people that are impacted, how are we ensuring that they can find a soft landing. I mean, finding multiple options for each individual, like going down to that tactical level, right? And trying to find like, okay, are there other founders we know? Are there other teams that we know that are hiring that could use these talent? And also having the managers have that conversation with the staff to just try to understand like what is it that they want, because sometimes they actually just want to chill out for a couple of months, which is fine. And I think all of that. The other thing that I'll add is, I think in any exercise like this, we have to rein in that instinct that we have as founders to say, okay, go, like, we're now leaner, meaner, and we need to hit the market hard, right? I think we need to rein that instinct back, and I know that was a struggle for me personally, but really pulling back and giving people that space, really that space to let it settle in, to they're good friends that they have that had left the company, to have that kind of parting of ways. That was so important, I think, for us, and I think it helped those that had left as well. I would like to think so anyway.
I mean, when I'm listening to what you're saying, CT, some of what you're describing is almost at the same level as the process that you have to go through when you're grieving over something, there is that resolution process that you have to create the space for. So that I really appreciate your call out about, we as founders have to restrain our desire to hit it hard regardless of the circumstances. I think that's a really human-centric approach. I want to yield the floor to Prem and give him an opportunity to respond to anything that either of you said, but also, share with maybe from his experience at in his current role or in his previous roles, what are some of the things that he's done that's really made that transitionary period much more effective in terms of employee engagement and creating that boomerang environment or space for that boomerang environment.
Yeah. So first off, definitely want to echo what CT and Jay were saying. And I do. I think the grieving process is a good metaphor. One thing I'll say is when I think of talent development, I think of engagement strategically. I think if you're figuring out those plans once something like this happens, it's already too late. Like a strategic level, it should already be pretty innate within your culture and process, how you engage employees, how you develop them. So I look at situations like this as more of tactical execution of existing cultures and strategies. So you need those things in place before. Then once you hit an environment like this, absolutely, I think all the stuff that was mentioned are really, great ways of ensuring that you're having the right conversations, that managers are ready, that you're treating people fairly, so they remember that on their way out. So I think that's what I would add. I think a lot of this starts with kind of what happens before the downturn is really how you succeed in a downturn.
So I really like something that you said there, Prem, on taking a strategic view of this entire effort. And I also like the fact that you called out that, hey, if you're thinking about taking a strategic view after the fact, I'm paraphrasing, that's actually the wrong approach. And I want to tie this thing together. We've all seen it. I think, Prem, it was you earlier in the conversation that mentioned that, hey, we were in this environment 18 months ago where money was cheap, and you see all these tech organizations that are just like rapid fire accelerating their employee teams and all that sort of stuff. When we look at taking a strategic view on your people strategy, if you had a chance to hit rewind and advise those founders or those companies on a more balanced talent strategy effort, especially when it comes to employee engagement and retention initiatives, what would be your recommendations to those founders on how they can be much more, what's the right word, much better stewards of those funds that they're getting, so that they're not in a position 6 months down the road to just have to lay off like half of their staff? I want to hand that question off, and I'll have CT chime in on that. What would be your advice when it comes to taking that balanced approach across your entire talent pipeline when you're dealing with taking that strategic view?
Yeah, I think the starting point for me is always the spreadsheet, right? We've got a financial model. We're looking out 12, 18 months into the future. And we have to pressure test some of our assumptions. So obviously, when you take money from a VC.
All right, I'm going to jump in real quick. I am not surprised that an economist referenced a spreadsheet in the conversation. Sorry, I just had to chime in.
Yeah, but so okay. I mean, it guides a lot of at least the way I think about things. And when you take money from VCs, you're selling a particular vision of the future to them, which involves a particular trajectory for growth, and that growth has to be backed up by the numbers and your hiring plans and everything else. And especially in situations where your growth is going to come from adding headcount, and that each person that you add maybe has a 3 to 6 month ramp period, you have to make those decisions 6 to 9 months ahead of time in the hopes that will work out. And so what ends up happening is you go through this hiring uh, exercise while the numbers have yet to catch up, and that's always scary. But that's the hyper growth playbook, right? And I think as founders, one of the things that we always take a view on is we prefer to hire as slowly as possible, and um, this would I'm pretty sure this is not new to all the good founders that I've met. Like hiring very, very slowly, making sure that you're getting a good fit for the role, making sure that the person is onboarded well, um, from day not even like day minus 10 or whatever it is, from the time that they sign that contract, the employment agreement, all the way to the 30, 60, 90 days beyond, to be able to to onboard them well and make sure that they settle in. At the same time, that's going to create a natural drag to that hiring process, but it's good. It's good drag. Like, it's much better to do that than to end up hiring 5 people, firing 3 within the first 3 months, and then rehiring them again. So, I mean, it makes sense on the spreadsheets too.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about factoring in ramp with an eye towards optimizing your talent at each desk, like how do we maximize this person's capability at each desk, is an important call out. I want to have Jay chime in and kind of talk a little bit through about how you prioritize in a strategic way what your talent strategy should be that sets you up well for any potential economic downturn. And that's really one of the things that we want to we want to hash out in this part of the conversation.
Uh, Thanks, Jim. So I work mostly right now with small, medium companies from 50 to 500 employees. And what I often see that companies might not have any like people strategy at all, because it's like it requires a lot of knowledge how to build it and experience. And this is it's never late to start doing that, because like if you're talking about engagement, for example, it's so much connected with productivity for your employees, and you will never achieve the productivity you want without working on engagement. So engagement strategy automatically it's introduced on the day when you decide, okay, I would like to have like a high bar of performance in my teams, and this is why I need people to really come and work not from like 8 hours just in a slow mode. They just need to be really engaged. And when we're talking about retention, it's again, companies sometimes need some help to understand that, okay, where we are now, where we would like to be in a few, like in a few months or years, what is the gap between those in skills, for example, what is our skills gap, and what should I do with that? Like, can I build that skill in my teams and my people, or should I get it from the market? And this is where your retention strategy is born, because in many situations, it's easier for you to understand that there is no way I can hire more people. I just don't have resources for that. So I don't have other options other than build this competence. And this is where your talent development strategy is born. So they are all very, very connected with each other, and just starting to work with that constantly in iterations in your executives team is super important.
So I think the way that I hear what you're saying, Jay, and thanks for that feedback, is that when you're taking in good times a balanced employee strategy, specifically when it comes to engagement, development, and retention, you're creating an environment or a culture that that communicates to that employee that, hey, this is you're creating psychological safety. So if you've held that through, and when things go sideways from an economic perspective, and you're continuing that effort, that's got some significant brand impact that I think is important to kind of keep in mind, versus what you've seen where organizations go on these hiring binges. You hire 8,000 people, and then 6 months later, when the results aren't there, you fire 8,000 people. You're creating that culture where everybody is like having their head on a swivel. So I think that's an important strategy component that you called out. Prem, I want to have you chime in on this topic too, because you actually created the springboard for this element of the conversation, which is, hey, when you take a strategic talent view, there are things that you need to be doing, and in that same vein, how would you advise organizations to prioritize their talent strategy elements, especially when it comes to how they select talent, how they keep them engaged, how they retain them? What are your key tips or advice when it comes to keeping that strategic mindset from the engagement and retention perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I do is be transparent to talent about my business strategy. They need to know what they're signing up for. I think of transparency as, paying respect to bring people along on the journey with you. If someone invites me to go on a merry-go-round and instead we're going skydiving, the risk I signed up for is much lower than the risk that is actually exhibited in the environment that I'm in. So I think it's fine to have a risky business strategy, but that needs to be very clear when you're hiring, when you're marketing your employer brand, when people come on board. And I think that expectation setting, I think, can play into psychological safety if people know what they're signing up for. From a talent strategy standpoint, I think it comes down to me the basics of transparency, of expectation setting, having a clear path, knowing what big bets the company is taking. So it's not bad to be risky, but it's bad to be secretly risky when the rest of the employees do not know this is the train they're on and this is where we're going. So that's big for me.
Great stuff, Prem. So let's be real about the environment that we're all in right now. So we're all part of tech organizations. You three are leaders of tech organizations. I'm a guy that runs his mouth in a tech organization. Typically, when we're talking to our buyers, they're in a world where, hey, the economic situation is soft. I have leadership across the entire enterprise that is saying, hey, I got to do more with less. I don't have time to focus on this engagement or retention stuff because it's not really a priority at this point. We're just trying to keep our lights on. So I want to have each of you kind of talk through why that is probably a dangerous position for talent leaders to be in, or talent leaders to take, and why there's a better way forward. So I want to hand that off to CT. When you hear that, and you will hear that if you aren't already, how would you respond that, hey, there's probably a different way that we should look at the economic situation and see this as an opportunity?
Yeah, it's really interesting every time I hear that objection, that somehow there's this magical thing that if we focus on this abstract business part of things, the business is going to take care of itself. And somehow in our minds we have this they have this split between the business and the people, where in reality the business is the people. And if you take care of your people then take care of the business. It works. It doesn't work in any other way. So at least the way that we approach it, that transparency and that openness comes first of all from listening. And especially in times of great uncertainty, it is really scary even for leaders to go off unchecked without that ear on the ground and trying to figure out how are my people feeling. And in fact, if anything, the more uncertain the business environment is, the more leaders need to be taking in signals from everywhere as much as they can and processing that quickly from the market and from their own individual employees and their people in their organization. So I would say that that's the very first step. And then having smart tools to guide leadership decisions with their people through all of this to automate that. Have one-on-ones is such a critical lever for management, and it's so tempting sometimes for leaders to just say, okay, I've got no time for that. right now. And then 3 weeks later, they get a resignation letter from their top performer and wondering, how is it that this guy is resigning in this kind of environment? But it still happens. And, we just really cannot ignore this. And to scramble back from that kind of surprise is really difficult to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about don't forget about the fundamentals of the business. If you take care of your people will take care of the business. That is an important call out when you're getting that argument or that pushback from the customer landscape that, hey, this isn't a priority or this can't be a priority right now. So great call out there. Jay, what would be your advice when you hear that sort of response from the buyer community that, hey, in these sort of times, we don't have room to invest in these areas?
It's a very interesting moment because we, on the one side, we see this situation like with economy that you mentioned, but also we see that the level of maturity of understanding their talent strategy is growing thanks to so many people working in this industry, thanks to you, Jim. So we see that more and more companies and leaders, they understand that this is a core of their strategy to make their business successful. It's not just some abstract thing, this retention, engagement, development. It's really, it's very highly connected with your business growth. So in this situation, if you don't care of your employees, if you don't work with this strategy, if you don't start this, someone else will do that. So this competition is really growing. And if you right now at this moment of this stage of economy, if you double your effort in this strategy, it can be a great opportunity for you as a company, because this is what employees remember. This is how the company worked with them during this hard time. So when good times come, they will be twice more loyal and willing to continue, because this is a great chance actually for many companies which are ready to do some first steps.
Yeah, I mean, that's great stuff that you shared there. Demonstrating companies have an opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to their employees in tough times, which will actually double up that organization or employee commitment on the back end. Prem, same question to you that I want you to field when you hear that same objection. Hey, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time, the economic situation isn't right for us to be focused in this area. What's your push back?
Yeah, well, first off, I agree with Jay. I think the mindset is shifting. People get this, and they're starting to more and more. Quite simply, if you're trying to hit the same business objectives or greater business objectives with less people, you need that smaller group of people to be more engaged. And in today's day and age, with the tech that's out, I feel in the past, maybe not all those promises were delivered. So buyers might have gotten burned and might not really see that these technologies really will help you with those things. But I think there's opportunities with less people to do more by equipping them with the right technologies to help with automation, to help with measuring how engaged your employees are. You can't change what you can't measure, and now almost everything is measurable. So how are we really keeping track of how we're doing? So yeah, that would be my reaction. I think it is a very clear tie-in to not just success but survival as a business, to make sure the folks that are working for you are engaged and really not just engaged but fulfilled, I should say, as well. Oh, you're on mute, Jim.
Geez, that's the second time. Normally there's only one time in the show that I do that. Thanks for that call out. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I can't believe that the time has flown by. So before we sign off, I want everybody to kind of share their one key takeaway, and also where people can find you if they're dealing with the specific types of problems that each of your organizations solve. So I want to lead off with Prem. Prem, what's the one big takeaway that you have for the audience, and where and under what circumstances should people reach out to you, and where can they find you?
Yeah, so key takeaway, other than I need a virtual background like CT's, that's pretty impressive. I will say, just it is a tough time right now for a lot of people, for a lot of folks' families, but I do think there's opportunity and silver lining. So one of my key takeaways is this is an opportunity for employers to step up and really drive their employer brand forward, not just maintain, but how do we use this as an opportunity to come out of even stronger? So that would be my key takeaway. Connecting with me, you can look me up on LinkedIn. Feel free to email me, my first name, prem@humanly.io. Our website is humanly.io. And on Twitter, I'm at Prem Kumar Tweets. Thank you.
Thanks, Prem. Jay, same question to you. Key takeaway, and how and under what circumstances should people reach out to you? Floor's yours.
I totally agree with Prem. So this is the moment of change, times of change, and why not to use this moment to introduce something that you like really feel it's time for your company to grow, your culture to grow, your people to grow. So this is the great moment to start some activities if you have never did it. For example, start some engagement things or start some development things, because this is just no need to delay it or postpone it, and just connect it with your strategy. And I am really open to networking. Please find me on LinkedIn or write to me directly by email. My email is jaym@talentway.io. And we could help you just to figure out, give you some advices with your talent development strategy, maybe some automation. So really open, really would like to help. Jim?
Thanks for being on the panel and sharing your insights, Jay, and reminding me for the third time that I'm on mute. Now, same question to CT. CT, share with us where people can find you, your key takeaway, and under what circumstances does it make sense for people to reach out to you?
My key takeaway over the past 57 minutes has really been this phrase, strategic empathy. I think we're in this period now that if you're a founder for any period of time, it's actually a really good learning moment, right? And this is the time that you really need to dig in, whether you're a leader or a founder or whatever it is, right? Dig in, understand how to navigate from a market and business standpoint, but also realizing how closely intertwined business strategy is with the human element of business, which is your people, allowing those feelings to be at work and to create that space for them, but at the same time aligning everybody and engaging everybody to move forward together. And in times like this, it's more critical than ever to have data-driven signals that you collect as leaders, as well as tooling. I think Prem made a really good point about if you're trying to do more with less, the only way you can do that is to leverage the productivity of the people and the managers that you already have. So if you're managing a team, there are all these little things that you need to do to manage a team. You need to have your reviews, you need to give good feedback, you need to listen well, you need to schedule your one-on-ones, and all of that administration shouldn't bog down on your time. That can be outsourced to software, which is where EngageRocket can help. So I can be found on LinkedIn you can just type in my name, CheeTung, or you can connect with me directly on email, cheetung@engagerocket.co, and our website's at www.engagerocket.co. So thanks for having me, Jim.
Yeah, no, great stuff, CT, and thanks for sharing your insights. I wanna again thank all of the panelists for their great insights and conversation. This was a really fun chat for me, and I'll echo what everybody else has said. You can kind of pick two paths. You can pick the path that everybody else is taking, or at least a lot of companies are taking, where you're just kind of cold in terms of your people strategy and not factoring in that these are actual livelihoods and lives that you're impacting in terms of how you move forward in these uncertain economic times. Or you can choose the path where you're doubling down on what makes your organization great. You can double down on what your stated values, mission, and vision are, and really invest in those areas that actually set you up for success when things return to what normal looks like. The choice is up to you. The brand implications are pretty clear. And I think when you're looking at conversations like this, when you're looking at how can you do more with less, which is a central theme to why we actually launched this show, there's a lot of different ways that you can leverage the combined intelligences of the people that we have on this panel. So for those of you who want to connect with anybody on the panel, feel free to connect with me. I'll facilitate an intro. You can obviously keep track of what's going on by connecting with me on LinkedIn or follow us on the Talent Strategy 60 page. You can also find me doing a lot of stuff as part of the channel partnership team at Circa. So when you're talking about talent strategy, anybody on this panel can help you, and I'm certainly the big nerd in the house as far as that goes. So definitely connect with me there. We appreciate you taking the time to kind of view the session. We'd appreciate your feedback. Drop comments, connect with us, and let us know what you took away from the show. And we will have another great show coming up a couple days from now, and we'll be doing this every week until the end of the year, and then we'll have a different format in the beginning of the year to share some more great insights. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we're looking forward to seeing you on the next episode of Talent Strategy 60.